If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'll know that it is no shock if you ask me what the number one thing someone should do today to become an expert, to set themselves apart in a field, is to start a podcast. And starting this podcast, I've had tons of people ask me, not just about AI, which is what I talk about every day, but how to use AI to actually augment, start, grow, and help in podcasting. This is something that I'm very passionate about. I've started multiple podcasts. And so today on the podcast, I want to break down some of my strategies that I use, some of the AI tools I use to help create this podcast, as well as tell you about a brand new course that I am launching, a podcasting course that is designed to help take anyone from absolute beginner to an expert in podcasting, and not just in the production, the quality, in the, getting guests and everything, but actually to growing to do essentially what I've done, how I've gone over 4 million downloads, organic downloads on my podcasts, and how I've been able to replicate that across 4 different podcasts. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is, over the last year and a half, we've seen a lot of really interesting news headlines and a lot of really big players and small players enter the space and create a bunch of very powerful AI tools that are super useful for podcasting. Now, I think the most obvious when I start, looking at how I am going to launch a podcast, how I'm going to create a new piece of content, I think the base, of course, is going to be something like Anthropic's Claude or ChatGPT. These are great tools for essentially doing some of the research, sourcing, content, getting ideas. Typically, what I will do is I'll find a handful of news articles around a topic I want to talk about, something I found on Twitter, something I found over on TechCrunch or The Verge. I'll find a handful of news sources. I like to get a couple different ones because they have different quotes from different people. If they're all covering kind of the same big topic, I will feed them all into ChatGPT or Claude, and I'll say, based off of these articles, write me a summary, or I'll say, write me like 7 bullet points that are the most important things. Now, I think the best thing to do is to, read those articles, get an idea of the story, and then I like to go and just essentially kind of freestyle, record a podcast, and work with the 7 bullet points that I'm given. So as far as content goes, this is how I essentially create news content, and this is where AI is super helpful for me there. Now, when it comes to actually, taking that podcast episode and turning it into something that is, sounds amazing, there's a bunch of different tools I found, and there's a handful, for video stuff. Descript is an amazing tool that is great for helping you edit podcasts, adding captions, making your podcast, essentially editing the video, making it like a high quality piece of content to post on LinkedIn or another platform like that. When it comes to the actual audio itself and cleaning it, now if you're just doing an audio only podcast, this works amazing. And I've probably mentioned it 100 times, but podcast.adobe.com. It's Adobe's podcast studio. They have a specific feature that I use all the time that I'm probably using on this episode that you're listening to, called Enhance Speech. Now, the thing that's really powerful about Enhance Speech, when I was first starting out my podcast, I probably had a $25 microphone from Amazon, just a USB microphone plugged in, and it did not sound great. Sort of sounded like I was recording in a can. At the beginning, I was definitely very budget conscious, and so when I was doing this recording, I was trying to do it as cheap as possible, and I would take those recordings that didn't sound incredible, put them into Adobe Audio Enhancer, and it sounded like I recorded it in a studio. Now, today, when I'm in my studio, I'm using something like the Shure SM7B, the same microphone as, Joe Rogan. So the audio doesn't really need any help. When I'm traveling, like you're listening to right now, I've been traveling out of the country for the last month. And so I have a travel microphone with me, which is not a Shure SM7B, because in order to use that, you need to, have like an audio interface and all this extra cables and gear and stuff. So I bring a USB microphone with me, and I still use Adobe Audio Enhancer, their Enhance Speech tool. It's phenomenal. You can upload video or audio clips, and then you kind of have a toggle there between 10% and 100% of how much enhancement it adds to your voice. Now, I'm someone that has been working with audio for many, many years. So before these AI tools came out, I was using things, and I still do use for like recording, like free open source tools like Audacity for the recording. And they have all these tools like clip edit, like click editors and sound removal and like all of these different things. But at the end of the day, honestly, this AI tool from Adobe, their Enhanced Speech, is the number one thing I recommend to everyone. It's amazing. It does a great job. You don't have to be super knowledgeable on like how to use audio editing software and changing a lot of settings. You can just be sure that you're going to get an amazing audio recording out of, their audio enhancer. So that's how you get the awesome quality. Now, when it comes to actually sharing the clips, doing some of the marketing, growing a little bit, my number one piece of advice I give people is Opus Clip. And it's actually opus.pro is the website. So I'm going to put a caveat on this, and it's actually quite a big caveat. So the first thing I'll say is full disclosure. I am a paying user of Opus Clip. I love it. I have tons of credits, and I have my interns working on our account like almost every day, creating clips. But the thing that I will say about Opus Clip in particular, it's awesome because you can upload an entire podcast into Opus Clip, like a 30-minute podcast, 20-minute podcast, especially when you're doing interviews is where I see it being really, really powerful. But you upload the full podcast in there, and it can go and pick out little clips that are great. And it can edit captions in there, throws emojis in there. It can even now do B-roll, and it can do AI-generated B-roll. Now, full disclosure on the AI-generated B-roll, because I've tested it out a lot. Currently, it's just like AI-generated images, and it kind of pans around the image. So I'm sure in the future when there's more of these video tools, if they're, economically viable, they're going to probably change it up a little bit and have the option to have like actual AI-generated images, probably from things like Runway or Pico Labs, whatever. In there currently, that's not there. But regardless, it's fairly decent. Now, the caveat I'm going to put on this is what I typically do is have my editors put clips in there, generate clips, export them, and then do some fine-tuning and tweaking and making sure it's, do a little extra editing on top of it. But, how much time it actually saves them from having to just go through 30 minutes of footage and trying to find interesting bits and do all the editing for them is insane. So this absolutely saves them, I think, probably 80% of the time that they typically were spending on editing clips previously, because I used to just pay people on Fiverr or other places to go and just edit clips from scratch before any of these tools existed. And this saves a ton of time, a ton of money. It gets it done very fast. And yeah, they're able to then go and share these. We share them on LinkedIn. We share them on TikTok, on YouTube Shorts, on Instagram Reels. And they actually do quite well. I've gotten 30,000, 20,000, 10,000 views on a bunch of these clips that we have generated. So these clips can do really well. Of course, the quality of the content, the quality of the guest makes a huge impact on what's going to go viral. It's not just like you can take, bad quality and use some AI tool and all of a sudden it's going to do well. Like the content and the guests have to be, really good. But assuming you have that, this is a really awesome way to use AI to speed it up. So these are some of my top AI tools I use. The one notable mention I want to say a shout out to is Riverside. This is a tool that I have been using for the last, I think, 6 months to a year. And it has a ton of AI tools built into it. So Riverside specifically is something that I use when I'm having guests on the podcast or when I'm doing most of my other podcasts, AI Applied, AI Hustle, Founder Built, that I do with co-hosts. And essentially, we're in a studio on Riverside together. We do the recording. And the thing that's great about it is it records to our devices and then uploads everything all together. So you get the highest quality. It's not like you're going to get lag like if you recorded a Zoom call. So whatever, that's normal. That's not AI. That's just a cool tool. But they do have a whole bunch of, the reason I bring it up is because they have a whole bunch of really awesome AI tools embedded in there. Now, I know this is kind of meta because this is going more into my actual process, but if you are interested in podcasting, hopefully this is interesting. They have the feature. So Riverside, I think, is, $20-$30 a month or whatever. And it's, its use case is being able to record podcasts remote. And I actually, even when I do my own podcasts, like I record them on Riverside just so it's easier for my editors to go and get a hold of. I don't have to upload the clips to somewhere and wait for it to load and make sure I have good enough internet and leave my laptop open while things are uploading or whatever. Especially when I'm traveling, I just will go record in my Riverside studio and then it's ready to go. But the thing that I love about it that really helps a lot of our processes out, they have the same, like some very similar to what I was mentioning before with Opus. They have some similar features where it's able to like kind of give you clips of what's relevant or interesting in your podcast. And essentially the way that this works is they take your podcast, they transcribe it. So you use an AI to make the transcription of it. And then they take that transcription and they send it to something like ChatGPT, and they say like, hey, out of this transcript, what are the most interesting bits that are most likely to go viral, right? And then ChatGPT is going to go pick it out, send it back to them. They take that and all the transcript is tied to a timestamp, and then they, make the little video clip from it. So anyways, this is how Opus does it. This is how Riverside does it. It's fairly straightforward. But what's interesting to me is, or what's useful for me is that Riverside will do this, but they're not like, their whole bread and butter isn't like a social clip, a short form social clip editor. So like they do it, but it's not like the main thing they like you can use it for that. It's not the main thing they do. But what I like to use them for is essentially doing that process of finding the clips, and then downloading those already found clips, right? So if it's going to find you a 30 or 60 second clip and uploading that to Opus Clip, because Opus Clip charges you by the length of your file. So if you upload like a 2-hour long podcast, it's going to eat up like tons of your credits because it's got to churn through like 2 hours of podcasts to find your clips. But if you already do that on Riverside, it's kind of like free or just like included, and it's going to give you like 5 clips from your 2-hour podcast, and they're a minute long, and you upload those 5 clips to Opus. That only uses up like 5 minutes of your credits. So anyways, that saves you a ton of money on that end, or a ton of credits or whatever. So that's kind of a pro hack that I use to make sure I have a lot of credits, because it's not always super cheap to use some of these tools. In any case, all of these are things that have immensely sped up my entire process. The last thing I want to mention is something that I do every single time I post an episode, and or someone from my production team does, because I've just shared essentially my prompt. That is, every time we post an episode, we have a specific prompt on ChatGPT that essentially we use to generate the title and description for our actual podcast episode. Now, Riverside has a lot of really cool features and tools when you record on Riverside, but we don't always record on Riverside, so I'm just putting that caveat in there. When we do record on Riverside, it actually recommends, it uses AI, the transcript thing I mentioned before, where it makes a transcript of your entire podcast. It uses AI to come up with its own description and its own suggested title. Now, this doesn't mean that it's always like the perfect title, and sometimes you got to work with it. If you don't like, because they're just essentially using a prompt to come up with the title via Riverside. So if you don't like exactly how it labels things, you can make your own custom prompt in ChatGPT and try to be a little bit more clever. For me, something that I've done that is pretty useful is when I'm doing my news segments, I will essentially be talking, like I'm working off of a couple of articles, right? And so I have a prompt where I upload the title of one of those articles, and I'm like, based off of this article, write a podcast title and focus on this element and that element. And, I have like kind of this custom prompt I've created, and I do the same thing with the description, and I use AI to write my descriptions and my titles. And honestly, it just saves me a lot of time instead of having to just sit there and think and type it out and try to figure out whatever the best title is. It just saves me time. It's just another thing I use AI for that just saves me time. So there are a ton of different things I have personally been doing over the years to essentially use AI. And the last bonus thing I want to talk about that's really interesting recently I've discovered is using 11 Labs. They have 11 Labs, of course, is like the best AI audio tool out there right now. They have a new dubbing studio. So something I've experimented with is creating translated versions of this podcast that you're listening to. It's going to get translated into, they do up to like 120 languages, I believe, but maybe the dubbing studio only has 20 or 30. I'm trying to remember exactly because I have a virtual assistant that runs this process for me. But it's a really amazing product where essentially you can upload this, an audio file, or even just give it a YouTube link to a YouTube video. So like a lot of these podcasts turn into YouTube videos. We upload the link to the Dub Studio. It essentially clones your voice in whatever language you're talking in, and then it has it translated into, Japanese, Mandarin, French, German, but it's my voice actually talking, and then it syncs it up with the video. So when you get the video, it's my voice talking to the video at whatever points that I'm talking about, and everything's sunk up. It's really, really a cool tool, and it's kind of the reason why 11 Labs was created to begin with, was for like these dubbing features. So yeah, overall, it's a great tool. Now, all of these strategies that I've mentioned here and many, many more are in my new podcast course that I would love if you are interested in starting a podcast and you want to set yourself apart in whatever niche or industry you have, or if you already have a podcast and you're looking to take it to the next level and grow and scale it. I have done this multiple times. I've repeated the process over 4 different podcasts, and I've been able to achieve over 4 million downloads on my podcast. So I would love for you to join in the course, and you will absolutely take your podcast to the next level. If you're starting a podcast, I highly recommend this as one of the number one ways to build a personal brand and become an expert in whatever niche or area you currently work in. I think podcasting has some of the lowest hanging fruit and the most untapped potential right now. It's not like, the thing that I love about podcasting is it's not like, TikTok or Instagram, which, I've played with and sometimes I can crack and sometimes it's hard. But like, I just feel like a lot of these social platforms, it's like all about an algorithm, and it's like, if you don't hit the algorithm, your content doesn't get shown. With podcasting, it's different. It's a lot like SEO was back in like the 2000s, where if you just create content and if it's decent and you label it correctly, which I explain how to do in my course, you're going to get listeners. You're just going to get downloads, and it's going to be shown. And I will also caveat this with saying that I have started, for running different experiments, over 100 different actual podcasts. But, before I got into the mad scientist mode and kind of had things cracked a little bit, I personally had run like 4 or 5 podcasts and had very, very varying results. My first podcast I started was a huge struggle to get any listeners on it. Second podcast was the same thing. I had amazing guests and I was getting like 20 listens on it. And I got so fed up that I literally made an AI podcast. It was just an AI voice reading a script. And that, through a bunch of different marketing hacks and tricks I tried, that podcast started getting tons of downloads and eventually reached over 100,000 downloads. And when that happened, I realized I needed to shift the way I did things. So that's why that's when I started this podcast, AI Chat. And I essentially was able to figure out how to use, I did a lot of experiments on those AI podcasts that I probably wouldn't have done on an actual voice podcast. But through all of that, I figured out essentially all of the strategies and everything you need to take a regular podcast with a regular person talking or interviewing guests and get millions of downloads off of that, which is what I've done with AI Chat. So if you are interested in starting a podcast, I would love to have you on the course. The link is in the description. It is currently on sale. So if you're interested in getting it at this lower price, you can go to the link in the description. It's podcastcourse.com/courses. And you can sign up for the course. I would love to have you try it out, and I hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day.